There's over 10 million people in Mexico City here who haven't yet bought their first fridge or air conditioner, let alone their first car. But they know what they want.
CD-ROM para ver y oír enciclopedias o música. Fax son las licuadoras Mulinex.
People all over the third world can see through our windows nowadays, thanks to modern mass media. They know how we live and what we have, and they want it too.
Los McTríos son lo nuevo en McDonald's. Hay McTríos de McPollo y Quarter Pounder.
Fast food chains know that most of the other 4 billion people on Earth would like to eat meat every day too. But there isn't enough land to raise that much beef. Somebody is going to have to do without their hamburgers.
We view television and we can now see what happens in other parts of the world, and suddenly all of the world wants. And they want to blend their vegetables in a blender, and they want to wash their clothes in a clothes washer so that the wife can have a second income and contribute to the well-being of the home. We want to travel, we want leisure time, we want to read books, we want to communicate with other parts of the world. We are fascinated with what we can do today with instant communication. So this already happened. It's not going to go backwards. The Chinese and the Mexicans and the Brazilians and the Indonesians want to have their home. They want to have their basic needs covered, and for that they're going to do anything.
Malls are spreading through Mexico and across the globe, and why not? But how many consumers like us can the planet survive? We're going to have to make a deal with the third world, and it's going to cost us more than money. People here will only refrain from buying cars if people in the first world stop buying them too. It's just human nature. People won't make sacrifices unless everybody shares the pain. If we can't all shop till we drop, then none of us can, whether we live in Mexico or China or England. This is not morality, it's the logic of survival. We are heading for a world with 3 billion cars and a permanently brown sky, unless we establish global rules limiting every country to a safe and equal level of consumption. But if that's what it takes to survive, then it's hopeless, isn't it? All of human history shows that even individuals won't cooperate, let alone countries. But that kind of history is ending. Things work differently in a global village. Caught up in the present, we hardly notice that we're finally starting to escape the terrible patterns of the past. This is the Zócalo, Mexico City's oldest square. It's the center of the Mexican state, home of the national flag, the national palace, and the national cathedral. And it's a witness to how awful our history has been. This square was the center of state power under the Spanish Empire and under the Aztec Empire before that. And the ceremonies they performed here always had the same purpose: to awe the citizens with the power of the state.
You can see this sort of ceremony in any capital in the world, and in today's Mexico, it's mostly just for the tourists. But there's a lot of assumptions about power buried behind that little ritual, And there's some very similar assumptions about power buried over here. This is the great temple of Tenochtitlan, and the Aztecs who built it were not gentle people. Neither were the Spaniards who conquered them 500 years ago and deliberately built their own capital right on top of it. They were enemies, of course, but they were also brothers under the skin. Two brutal tyrannies with divinely ordained kings at the top, slaves at the bottom, and lots of soldiers to make sure things stayed that way. People often think that the natives of America were somehow more innocent, nicer than their wicked European conquerors. But whenever the people of the New World created a mass society, one with more than 1 million people in it, they followed exactly the same pattern as everybody else. The Aztecs had less technology than the Spanish, so they lost. But they were just as cruel, just as hierarchical. A militarized nobility ran everything, while ordinary men had few rights and women had none. The Chinese, the Turks, the Zulus, all the mass societies were the same. Tyrannies that kept their subjects in line by sheer terror. So how can we talk of sharing and mutual sacrifice to preserve the planet when there's been so little sharing in the past? Why would human beings suddenly change their ways?
Because it isn't just instinct. There's a reason why our past was so terrible. Until recently, the only way you could run a mass society was from the top down, as a dictatorship. The Aztecs and Spaniards and other mass societies of the past really had no choice but to rule by force. Democracy was impossible, because millions of people couldn't talk things over and make decisions by themselves. Until technology changed the rules. The device that altered history was the printing press, the first means of mass communication. It changed human life more dramatically than the wheel. For the first time, it gave millions of people access to the same information. In effect, they could all talk to one another about what was on their minds. Mass communications made democracy possible in mass societies. In the long run, they made it inevitable.
Just over 200 years ago, the very first mass society turned democratic, the United States. And it's no coincidence at all that about half the Americans alive in 1776 were literate. From that day to this, you can pretty well predict when any mass society on the planet will turn democratic by the following formula. Take the date when 50% of the population can read, add 1 or 2 generations for the ideas to ferment, and out comes democracy, more or less. Though I must admit that none of the early revolutions really gave everybody equal rights. Old habits of thought die hard, and even in the United States, equal rights were only for white males at first.
But then the list of people who should be treated equally started to grow. If all white males had equal rights, why not slaves? Why not women? Why not even the poor? The idea of equal rights for everybody was so sensible that it was soon causing revolutions even in countries without enough literate people to support a real democracy. Mexico, for example. A million people died in the Mexican Revolution that started in 1910. But most Mexicans couldn't read, so real democracy was impossible. They wound up with a single-party regime that talked about equality, but kept the power and privileges for itself. It was the same sad story across half the world, from Russia to Nicaragua, until a different kind of revolution happened. The communications revolution. And technology ambushed us again. This is Santa Ynez de Monte, a tiny village in the remote southern province of Oaxaca. There's not even enough space for the usual soccer field, just a basketball court that doubles as the town dance hall. Santa Ynez is the kind of place where half the world's population still lives. One foot in the 16th century, the other poised at the 21st. Outsiders would call it unspoiled, but for the people who live here, life has always been dominated by hard work, poverty, and ignorance. Until a few years ago, the closest thing to a mass medium in this town was a blackboard.
Animales mamíferos y los carnívoros. ¿Por qué son carnívoros? Porque comen carne.
But things are changing here since Demetrios Morales returned from work in the north some years ago and realized his village had been left behind by the modern world.
Que vaya un poco medio tristón el pueblo, porque como por allá cambia, hay más carros, más diferentes pueblos, están más organizados, más casas buenas, calles, luz, televisión, se ve muchas cosas afuera. Llegando aquí no hay eso, no había eso, pues. No había carretera todavía casi, no había luz y casas un poco.
Demetrios got the villagers to petition the government for electricity, and 6 years ago, to their surprise, power arrived in town.
Aquí son 10,250.
So did the bills that Demetrios collects each week as the town's commissioner of electricity. Power lines forced people to move their homes closer together and united them as a community. So they applied for status as a town and all the benefits that come with it. A city hall, a real school, even a small paved road that stops at the town's entrance. For centuries, the only fuel in the area was firewood, and the forests paid the price, as they do in much of the Third World. You can't blame people for doing what they must to survive. The arrival of electricity and gas has offered alternatives. It's also made life much better for people like Demetrios' daughter. Like most women in Santa Ynez, she used to spend her day burning wood in a smoky kitchen. Constantly breathing the smoke killed many women young here, and a small gas burner has probably added years to her life.
Con el gas prendí un cerillo y ya rápido, pero con la leña pues es más difícil. Aquí va a estar saliendo humo y todo, pues no se puede. Es más difícil, pues más la tos, sí.
But the biggest change is the small square box and its impact on the children. It's taking them out of their little enclosed world and giving them a glimpse not just of what they might have, but of what they might be. Their parents were peasants and farmers, but listen to them.
Ser un doctor. Yo, de ser un licenciado. Estudiar de secundaria y, como ya le dije, estudiar mis carreras para ser secretario de un licenciado, llegar a ser licenciado o gobernador de un estado. Yo también estudiar y agarrar una carrera para ser un deportista, un doctor.
Pero si no es doctor o deportista,
Pues así, a ser presidente de México.
After hundreds of years of solitude, a post office and a long-distance phone line have just arrived in Santa Ynez. Something new seems